so that the commander he had it was identified as the CDR and LMP and the CMP. So those were back in the fun days.
Well,
Go ahead.
That was important, and the reason, Janet, we have NASA Ames now. We talk about research.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay,
yeah.
I was muted. Sorry. I want to ask about the timeline. So you evoked the timeline, and you said something very important. You said it seemed like we were on a different timeline. Other things were happening, and then next thing you know, Kennedy's assassinated. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I have as an experiencer, ET contactee experiencer. Okay? So let's look at timelines. Are the three of us time travelers? And how do we know that? So when I was 4, I was taken on board a mothership. I was shown 24 different timelines. The worst case scenario was the planet Earth blew up. And the best case scenario, we were in a total utopian society. But I chose one that was about third from utopia. There's a lot of background noise. Can somebody moving things around? Who's making noise?
I'm sorry, I'm making noise. It's me making noise.
Stop making noise. Anyway, so they asked me which timeline do I want, and I said the third from the end, because we want something left to do, right? And then I came back. Hold on, my nose is acting up. I came back to the Earth, and that was 58. In 63, the Philadelphia experiment moved over to Montauk, and every 20 years when the biorhythms of the planet are in alignment, they fine-tune the timeline because they have an agenda that they want. So it's true, TJ. It was like our timeline got hijacked because the one that I was on in 58 was very blissful. We would have been much further along. We'd be in Star Trek. We'd be in a spacefaring race where all of us would be experiencing, not just a secret space program. But they hijacked it, and next thing you know, that was in 63, in August 10th, 1963, and then or August 12th. I'm sorry, 12th. And then by November, 22nd, 23rd, Kennedy was dead, and then we had everything else that happened. Bobby's dead, Martin Luther's dead, et cetera, et cetera. So it did hijack us into a different reality. But I think part of us, since we were all born while that other reality was in place, we feel it like at a deep level, like, this isn't right. I've heard other people say, I wasn't on that timeline. What happened to our timeline? Who hijacked our reality? So do you have any experiences that you might equate to that? And I'll go on mute. You guys talk about that. That was my experience. I'm sticking by it. Next person.
Well, real quick trivia, Janet. Do you know that Star Trek, the original first episode, was filmed at the TRW in Redondo Beach, and they used that building? And TRW, even with Star Trek, it's all it makes you wonder. You know what I mean? The company and the
knew
synergy.
That at some level. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Redondo Beach,
so
California.
So TRW was Thompson. And Thompson's my maiden name.
And Tom Kins with it. Yeah, that's weird. So there's.
And my dad is William Thompson, and that was William Tompkins. So you look at these synchronicities and go, this is kind of weird, woo-woo. But, some people say, oh, that's coincidence. Yeah.
Tom and Thomas. All my guides as men was Tom. Like Thomas, I was married to Thomas R. Morris. And then Tommy Hawksblood came on to help us for the last 7 years with radio and getting the Stargate going. And then we got Thomas Becker for radio and a producer. And I put his name up here today. I'll have to take it down. But I guess he always said to remind him coming on. And then Tom, this is the metaphysical, spiritual part, I guess. We need to talk about, like you said, the timelines and how they get hijacked by people. If we don't have enough in the critical mass consciousness are recognizing the astronauts knew some funny things were going on, and that was my part, coming and going with NASA back in the day. And people may or may not remember seeing me there, how I got there, but I had my clearance levels, and they had me do an extra clearance level, and I always wondered about that. But we always had people like me coming and going, and Men in Black, and I was very good, trained to slip in and out from a very early age with the government and working with people out of Saudi Arabia, coming over and meeting with the Bushes. And, I had to entertain ambassador. I was like an ambassador for the world in Houston. Between the oil sheiks and raising I remember them laughing about it going to $5 a gallon, and that's just a trivia. But April '67, that was a good year for getting Star Trek series, but that was Redondo Beach. But Ken and I were walking around on that timeline with all these people, and now in 2019, it's our job to be organized after all the Apollo lunar landings and LMD, the descent engine with TRW, and now Armstrong's gone, Neil Armstrong, and Janet and I worked, and I talked with him, and then we talked with Ray Hernandez that was working here in Florida, where I live, with him to get, after he started several great groups, and now we're turning it all over, at least our group. Ray Hernandez is now a paid speaker, getting a minimum of $1,500, I understand. But people make so much to speak on topics.
We don't know
Ray
what people are getting.
We don't know what people get. That's the price they pay.
Easy.
We offered, my price used to be $5,000 minimum, and that was back in the 80s. So, yeah, just to show up and do an investigation. That was just to show up. They had to put $5,000 down, so to speak. And, it was very expensive to travel in the 80s. I can't imagine, showing up now. But we're trying to do something as a nonprofit, to be honest with you. But it takes fundraising. And so that's what a lot of these radio shows do, including this one. But, if you want to help us, that's great. But this is a mission to get people being aware that extraterrestrials are here. They always have been. Alien civilizations exist. And the timelines and evoking linear timelines is important to mention that we're not really linear, but we think we are. And what is reality? And so our group is coming under Alien Contact Organization, Ascension Center Organization for teaching metaphysics. We have the ACE Metaphysical Institute. And we have a spiritual side and a scientific side. We have spiritual science. And we're beginning now to get organized because there's so many groups competitively in the UFO biz and the alien biz, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So what I'd like to talk about is time travel is important, folks. Learning time and space-time and extraterrestrials and those that have worked. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how this government and evoking timelines and how it swapped, like Janet has said. She wanted us to talk a little bit about the evoking the timelines with Allied Command Organization. And we're going to call Ken R. Johnston Sr., our Ralph Kennedy Johnston, the fleet commander for all our groups now, because we have so many in social media, as a title to get us working together, because just me alone, I've got like 30 some odd websites or blogs, if you will, or domains or journals, and they're not mistake free, but we'd like to work towards, fewer. And Janet and I have been bringing on people for almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years June 3rd, including Stanton T. Friedman, which I evoked earlier, that's just passed. So this was a sad time between people that have passed. My husband's passed, Stan's passed. Glenn Fodder still talks about Tom Morris finding ETs on a base. I think that was in Maryland, but I've heard him on YouTube. And I don't know if, Janet, are you familiar with George Filer at all, or as a speaker? Or
I've never interviewed George Filer. I think I've seen him at a conference. He's not one that they have all the time. I haven't seen him on the circuit in a while. Maybe the smaller conferences, but not the bigger conferences. But you're evoking his name. Do you know him personally, or how do you?
No, we used to talk on a regular basis years ago in the early 2000s, And he knew that I was involved with Stanton, and he knew my Marcel story, Jesse Marcel, going back in the 70s. And then we had just beat Stan, but the Men in Black in the Navy had me go in at midnight. And so when I think of George Filer, all of a sudden I get all this
Wait,
spooky
that doesn't make
feeling.
sense. You went in where at midnight? You what?
To Marcel's house. Jesse Marcel's
you
house.
Didn't put all the...
Filer. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
George Filer makes me think of the spook business, the UFO spook.
Okay, so
nighttime,
you went into
midnight.
Jesse Marcel's. You went into Jesse Marcel's house with his knowledge or not knowledge?
Yeah,
he snuck in there.
He did. No. Jesse Marcel. The government made an appointment with him, but he didn't trust the government after working at Roswell and all this stuff. And the story wasn't out yet when I met him. That's when I wound up talking to his son and then his grandson, I think, in this reality. But
so you were going into his house and at midnight?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, we met at midnight. That's what the spook do. Well, there's a lot that doesn't make sense in my life, but I think that's why you and Ken are here, is to help figure out how to put the reality that really is happening in all places of the world. And the only people that really know that are usually those that are in the spook business or in the defense industry or in the intelligence community on the planet, right? Besides unless you're extraterrestrial.
So when you met with him, what was that about? Can you tell us what that was about?
Well,
you went to his house at midnight for what reason?
I guess I'm supposed to talk about it since I guess I brought it up. But isn't that weird how George Filer made me think of my past. Interesting, isn't it? So we all have a past and we all have a story to tell. And mine involves NASA 67 forward from the time in May 67 and then going back into the intelligence community later in 87, but I'd already gone through a second boot camp. And all this happened meeting German people, Men in Black, like the Men in Black movie, wearing black, and I guess NASA and the government and Langley people, and even getting your clearances. But to go back to the Jesse Marcel story, that's part of the Roswell story, or he's the one that really got the most attention, that Roswell story was evoked with me and Stan Friedman before the documents.
But I'm confused. What does this have to do with George Filer? Because you were in...
I don't know.
You were in George Filer's house at midnight with some spook deal.
Not George Filer's house. George Filer makes me think of the spook business or the Air Force. He was Air Force, and he saw a UFO. And he was part of MUFON, but he has the National UFO. You can look it up, Janet. National UFO Center, I think. And Ken, do you know George Filer? He's an older gentleman that's been in the spook business or the UFO business, or both.
No, I don't think I ever came across him.
Okay. Well, Janet, I guess we need to get in touch with George before he passes, because he's not quite as old as Stan, but he's up there. But look up National UFO Center, Janet, and you'll find George Filer. It's called Filer's Files. But George made sure I didn't lose. He wanted to, now, like whenever I decided to do the UFO Association for real, or make it a who's who or a trade association for people, not to forget him or his National UFO Center and Stan. And I had permission to evoke his name and not forget him or Stan, because they wanted credit for the UFO Association when I decided to really take hold or have time to work it. But since Stan's passed, Ken, and now Bruce Maccabee, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, he's one of the old guys. So, Janet, what I'd like to do tonight is help us make a list. Janet, remember when you and I were going to do event for ACO, or at least for Ascension Center, but we were going to have a who's who and the old guys, and even Stargate to the